Hello everyone! Early this year I thought it would be a great idea to read the entire Dear America series. This is a collection of books that debuted in the mid-90s, intended to give young readers a first-hand look at American history. I read a few of these as a kid, and my main takeaway back then was that they were super depressing. Reading the books as an adult, I can report that wasn't a totally inaccurate assessment. They do tend to be downers, but not entirely, some more than others, and for the most part, the books are pretty good. I was just going to cover the Dear America books, but since all the protagonists are girls, I decided to expand my project and mix up my reading some by including the My Name is America spin-off series, which is the boys' perspective. I did draw the line at the My America series for even younger readers, and in hindsight, I wish I had skipped the later mid-2010s Dear America publications as well, because they all but abandon the signature diary format, and they aren't as good. The protagonists are fictional characters who witness and participate in real events in American history, and occasionally they interact with real people. Their diaries are presented as authentic. Each one closes with an epilogue that tells what happened to the protagonist and his or her descendants. These epilogues sometimes sound so convincing that they can trick you into believing that the characters were real. The first couple times I was hoodwinked until I found the copyright page and a disclaimer printed in the back. They're a little tricky like that. The books also include supplemental historical information, some artwork, and, when applicable, a pull-out map. So I made a list, I organized it, and I set out to read all 62 books. 43 Dear America, and 19 My Name is America, and I chose to do it in chronological order rather than publication order, starting with the two books about travelers on the Mayflower in 1620. From March through June, I read almost nothing but these books. I did take a break to read Project Hail Mary, but then I was right back at it. I was ambitious, I was aggressive, I got through 48 of them, and then, on June 23rd, I quit. One might argue that having gotten so far, I should have just stuck it out. I only had 14 left. If I needed to take a break, I could have just taken a little break and then come back, and it should be a piece of cake, right? But I was tired of these books. I was enjoying them a lot of the time, but I was just sick and tired of the whole project. I wanted to read other things. I wasn't as interested in the 20th century ones. I never have been. Nothing that was left appealed to me, and actually a few of them put me off. I had them all 14, in my possession. They were on my shelf, and I looked at them, and I deliberated over this for a while, and I ultimately just said, nope, I've had enough. And that was it. The problem is that I wrote, filmed, and edited reviews of these books as I went. I've got a lot of footage on my computer. 9 hours of raw footage, about 2 hours edited. I don't want to waste it, so I've come up with a compromise. And I know this video is long. It's longer than I like my videos to be, and I know some people are going to look at the length and the subject and say, ugh, no, pass. But trust me, it could have been a lot longer. While a couple of the books were miserable slogs, and there was a handful I had to push myself to finish, I did like most of them, and a few of them I really enjoyed. So I have gone through and picked out my favorites and the ones I thought executed the concept particularly well. Unfortunately, as you watch these reviews, there will be some things that don't make as much sense because I changed the plan, and that means I lost some context. But I've tried to minimize the damage, and hopefully it's not too distracting. Here, in chronological order, are my reviews of the highlights of the Dear America and My Name is America series. Number 2 is A Journey to the New World, the Diary of Remember Patience Whipple, Mayflower 1620, by Catherine Lasky. This was the very first Dear America book, published in September 1996. Remembrance, or Mem, keeps a diary that she names Imp, as she makes her way to the New World seeking religious freedom with her parents and little sister. So this is the exact same series of events, now from a saint's perspective. And I read it just 24 hours later. That was odd. Overall, this book feels more mature than the other one did as the story progresses. Mem spends the harsh winter tending the sick and dying, and being surrounded by so much gruesome death and experiencing loss herself changes her and forces her to grow up before her time. I also appreciated that while Lasky doesn't show the separatists as perfect people, and they were not, there's nothing slipped in there to disparage their religion. There's no postmodern commentary here. It's portrayed as honest, simple, and enduring faith. She doesn't use Mem as a mouthpiece, really, to argue that they're all a bunch of hypocrites or anything like that. Number 3 is I Walk in Dread, the Diary of Deliverance Tremblay, Witness to the Salem Witch Trials, Massachusetts Bay Colony, 1691, by Lisa Rowe Faustino. This was published in October 2004, and it's the 35th book in the series, which makes it one of the last ones in the original Dear America run. From 1620, we jump forward 70 years. 12-year-old Deliverance, or Liv, is a newer resident of Salem Village. She and her older sister have come from Maine to live with their uncle. He has gone off somewhere, and they're struggling to keep the fact that they're alone on the farm a secret when suddenly a couple girls in the community become afflicted and start accusing people of being witches. The Puritans, instead of following a simple Bible-based faith as they claimed, added all these rules and obsessed over superstitions, and this was the consequence. A paranoid people fixated on magic and the devil and all of these ideas and this imagery, which made them ripe for a case of mass hysteria. The story of the Salem witch trials is infuriating from so many angles. So much power should never have been given to these young women who just, oh my goodness, took advantage to go after their enemies and anyone who spoke against them and to get all this attention for themselves. And but the whole thing really makes the leaders look foolish for not seeing through the girls' antics and recognizing what they were really doing. So I found the book pretty frustrating, and even the fictional plot with the main girl and her awful, lazy older sister squabbling was stressful, and I dreaded where it might lead. The title of the book, I Walk in Dread, was very appropriate. It's a longer diary, about 180 pages, and that's with a smaller font. If the font was the same size as the other books, it would have been even longer, and the story felt more sophisticated. It felt like it was aimed toward older kids, which is how I ended up forgetting for half of the book that Liv was only 12. But still, I thought it was a pretty good read. It covers many angles, and it's got a compelling protagonist struggling to understand what's going on. She's sometimes swept away with the fear of the crowd, but she's also level-headed, and she can see through some of it, and she's trying to reconcile what she has heard with what she has witnessed herself. Number 4 is Standing in the Light, The Captive Diary of Catherine Carey Logan, Delaware Valley, Pennsylvania, 1763, by Mary Pope Osborne. She wrote the Magic Treehouse books. I read a whole bunch of those when I was little. This is Dear America number 10, published in September 1998. Catherine, or Katie, is a 13-year-old Quaker living in a time when the community fears retaliatory attacks from the natives against their English enemy. She and her little little brother Thomas are abducted and brought to a camp belonging to the Lenape, or Delaware, tribe. She addresses her diary entries to her father in a desperate act to maintain a connection to her old life, but as she slowly allows herself to get to know her captors, she begins to find her loyalties divided. The story is simple, but the emotions are not, and I found Katie's situation and her character compelling. The fact that there's really no possibility of a happy resolution here makes this the heaviest one so far, and yet it's also the most bittersweet, as Katie learns to recognize that her native captors are God's creatures just like her own people. She forms bonds and even experiences love. I really liked this one, and I've got to say I am impressed with these so far. I like how distinct the girls' voices are, and how committed the writers were to reflecting the speech patterns of the time, and the grammar, and the religious denominations. Number 6 is The Journal of William Thomas Emerson, a Revolutionary War Patriot, Boston, Massachusetts, 1774, by Barry Denenberg. This is My Name is America, number 2, published in September 1998. After being orphaned by a fire and running from an abusive master, Will finds himself staying with a widow in Boston, helping her run her tavern and doing errands for a lodger who pens anonymous pro-revolutionary articles. In a strange departure, this one is not written in diary format. It is broken up by season, and it is in the first person, but there are no specific dates, and he's not addressing a diary. I missed the dates, especially because this is the American Revolution. Dates are important, dates are somewhat familiar. I don't know the reason for the change. I thought it possible that the My Name is America spin-off series perhaps hadn't committed to the diary gimmick yet. Still, I thought it was a pretty good book. I like the boy, and there are some interesting characters, which pulls you along until the action ramps up, Will doing some spy work and tensions between colonists and British soldiers coming to a head. My biggest disappointment is that it ends abruptly. Something big happens, triggering a significant shift. The protagonist makes a fateful decision, and it's over. I was like, what? You can't end it there. I need to know what happens next to these people. So that was frustrating, but the book does a fair job setting the scene, and there were a couple moments I found surprisingly moving. Number 8 is The Winter of Red Snow, the Revolutionary War Diary of Abigail Jane Stewart, Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, 1777, by Christiana Gregory. This was Dear America number 2, published in September 1996. Shortly after Abigail begins keeping a diary, General Washington and his ragtag army make camp nearby. She gives a play-by-play of that harsh winter, which was characterized by frostbite, starvation, disease, desertion, and disciplinary issues. Her family does laundry for all the officers at headquarters, which puts her into contact with George Washington. He makes a few brief, tasteful appearances, but it is his wife who assumes a prominent role in the narrative when she comes to stay and support her husband and support the army. I feel like I don't hear much about Martha Washington these days, but if this is an accurate portrait, she was a great lady, a kind and cheerful woman of deep faith whose courage was unflappable in the face of many grim horrors. I did read this when I was a kid, but I didn't remember much, just that it had some gross imagery and an overall bleak tone. Not that I would have phrased it that way when I was 10 years old. I had a much greater appreciation for it this time. That's not to say that my recollection wasn't accurate. It does have a few harrowing moments and descriptions, including a nauseating amputation story and smallpox vaccination scene that made me feel queasy. And the first half in particular is pretty despondent. My stomach just growled, I hope you didn't hear that. But there is a turning of the tide as the soldiers who survive the winter shape up into a proper continental army. Now, I haven't said much about Abigail's personal story because the real events do take precedence here, but it is also the story of an 11-year-old girl living her life, struggling with her sisters, fearful that her newborn baby brother won't survive the winter, just like the previous 5 baby boys that her mother has delivered. Her life is full of ups and downs, and she has kind of a somber attitude. What's especially interesting about this book, which is one of the OG Dear America entries, is that it's one of the few to have gotten a sequel written many years later. And I can see why. It ends in the summer of 78, so there's plenty more war to write about. And it was also one of the most popular books in the series. So popular that they made it into a movie. I did not know that before I reread it. It's just funny because, like all the others, it ends with an epilogue about who Abigail and her sister married, the children they had, where they settled, how they died. I'm curious to see if the sequel maintains this imaginary future, which has Abigail getting married at 15, or does something else. Number 13 is The Journal of Jedediah Barstow, an emigrant on the Oregon Trail, Ireland, 1845, by Ellen Levine. This is My Name is America, number 16, published in September 2002. Jedediah is a 13-year-old boy on his way to Oregon after his parents and little sister are swept away in a river crossing early on. He continues traveling with the wagon train on his own, working for another family that takes him in. As they go, Jedediah finds ways to prove his worth. After how long it took me to get through the last book, I thought that maybe I was just done with this whole thing, but I really liked this one. Like the boy who was traveling with Lewis and Clark, Jedediah is a likable kid. He's an engaging narrator with a unique perspective, plus the other characters are interesting. There's one character who is definitely the villain. He's the head of the family that takes him in. He's churlish and abusive, just a nasty piece of work. And that conflict was interesting. Plus, I like a good survival adventure story, so this was more up my alley, and thanks to this book, my interest in the project is reinvigorated. Number 14 is The Journal of Douglas Allen Deeds, The Donner Party Expedition, 1846, by Rodman Philbrick. This is My Name is America, number 13, published in January 2001. 15-year-old Douglas is an orphan who is allowed to join the Donner Expedition to California. Though the large group starts out with high hopes, they soon run into trouble, facing the consequences of bad advice and poor leadership, compounded by persistent bad weather, putting them far behind schedule with dwindling supplies. This book and the previous one have a lot in common. Both boys are recently orphaned. Both wagon trains leave from Independence, Missouri. They comment on the same landmarks. Douglas mentions crossing the Kaw River, which took Jedediah's family. But then the trails diverge, and this narrative, as most of us know, takes a much darker course. For most of us, our first thought about the Donner Party is cannibalism. But long before they reached that last resort, their expedition was plagued with issues, and really the group was doomed from the start. And I think that Douglas's account does a good job covering the bases, though I did note that James Reed is painted in quite a villainous light here, insinuating that most of the blame rests on his shoulders, while surprisingly little is said against the Donner brothers. I don't know if that's fair and accurate. I feel like this all wasn't just one man's fault. I was curious how the book would handle that last, most desperate and notorious stage of the expedition, because so far I have found the two series to be honest but discreet in their handling of disturbing historical moments. They have been descriptive and realistic, but not lurid, avoiding graphic sensationalism, because at the end of the day. While adults can absolutely enjoy these and get something out of them, they are designed for younger readers. So, how would they handle the cannibalism? Were they going to cover it, or would they do something to gloss over it? Well, author Rodman Philbrick does a pretty good job making it clear, albeit euphemistically for the most part, what is going on, and conveying the horror of it without going too far. Spoiler, Douglas himself refuses to participate. He is part of the group that leaves the lake to push through the mountains, and he ends up hiding among the trees because he feels some of his companions are looking at him with hungry eyes, waiting for him to die. So, it does go there. It does get very dark and desperate, and I think it's a satisfactory account. Number 16 is Across the Wide and Lonesome Prairie, The Oregon Trail Diary of Hattie Campbell, 1847, by Christiana Gregory. This is Dear America number 5, published in March 1997. Hattie has just turned 13 when her father announces that their family is going to leave Missouri, as they call it, and head west, where it's believed there is plenty of land for the taking. I was wary of reading a third wagon train book in a row within a couple days, but while these stories have things in common, Hattie's group leaves from Independence, they see the same landmarks. Like the Donners, they're inspired by Hastings' guidebook. They've heard about the Donners and are determined not to make their mistakes. While there is overlap, and I felt some deja vu, the characters and specific events are different enough that I'm not just reading the same thing over and over again. This is another of the OG Dear America books, one of the most popular ones, and one that I had read before. I barely remembered it. I brought it along on a road trip, and I found it quite depressing back then, but I have grown to appreciate and enjoy stories where people go on adventures, grueling adventures, and overcome hardship. Plus, I just got more out of it this time. I'm smarter now than I was when I was 10 or 11. That's not to say that it isn't rough. A number of pioneers perish, and Hattie herself witnesses several deaths. And again, I am impressed that this series doesn't try to shield its young readers from harsh realities. Hattie grows frustrated and depressed. She does have a sense of humor, at least in the first part, like when she tells an offbeat story about her uncle's coffin. But her experience on the trail ages her, so there's less humor as it goes on. There is a heartbreaking hemlock incident, and she has to assume a heavy weight of responsibility, especially as her mother, who never wanted to leave home, grows weary. So, it is a challenging story, but it's a good book. Number 19 is Seeds of Hope, The Gold Rush Diary of Susanna Fairchild, California Territory, 1849, by Christiana Gregory. This is Dear America number 22, published in June 2001. 14-year-old Susanna is aboard the California with her father and older sister Clara as they make their way to Oregon by water. Thank goodness, not another wagon train. While they are mourning the sudden and tragic loss of their mother, in whose journal Susanna is writing, the family's plans abruptly change when gold is found in San Francisco and gold fever strikes the world. Her father, a doctor, sees mining as a way to quickly recover their lost savings. This one started out dreary and sad, and I was like, oh no, not another one. But this time, things get better as time passes, following a more positive trajectory overall. Lots of interesting things happen, the characters are likable, Not surprisingly, given that it's about the gold rush, it's kind of a morality tale demonstrating how greed drives some men to cruelty, betrayal, and all-around wicked behavior. And these factors, plus the presence of mountain lions and grizzly bears, actually leads to some scary scenes when the two girls are left on their own in a crude cabin for an extended period of time. I really liked this book, and I read it not just in one day, but in one sitting. So, there you go. I should say, I did get up halfway through to go to the bathroom, and then I came back and I finished it. So does that still count as one sitting? Number 21 is A Picture of Freedom, The Diary of Clotie, a Slave Girl, Belmont Plantation, Virginia, 1859, by Patricia McKissick. This is Dear America number 4, published in March 1997. Clotie is a 12-year-old slave who works in the big house. As her mistress is teaching her son to read and write, Clotie stands behind them waving a fan and secretly listens and teaches herself. She begins keeping a diary to practice what she's learned, express her thoughts, and record events at the plantation. This is one of the best ones so far. I could have read it all in one night if I didn't have other stuff to do. It's another page-turner, as intense as the Salem Witch Trials one, possibly more intense. I don't know, they're neck and neck. There have been a few instances in this series where the person writing the diary had to keep it hidden because there would be trouble if people found out that he or she could write, or if they read the information written inside it. But this was the first time where I found myself thinking, stop writing! Destroy the diary! Obviously, this is silly, because if she stopped, the book would end, and also, it's fiction. But that is how much I was pulled into the story, and how dangerous it was for her to keep slipping away and writing in it. The consequences would be so dire, and I was so stressed. I was on edge the whole time, worried that she would be discovered. It's a really good book. It's another one where you can lose sight of the fact that the protagonist is just 12 years old, especially later on. But again, challenging experiences foster maturity. All of the characters are well developed, the good, the bad, everyone in between. You rejoice in Clotie's triumphs and commiserate with her sorrows, and the ending made me tear up a bit. Number 22 is A Light in the Storm, The Civil War Diary of Amelia Martin, Fenwick Island, Delaware, 1861, by Karen Hess. This is Dear America number 15, published in September 1999. 15-year-old Amelia, called Wiki by her father, has moved with her parents to a lighthouse where her father works as assistant lightkeeper. Amelia has quickly taken to her new home, assuming responsibilities and standing watch over the light, but her mother hates their new life, resenting the father for bringing them there, and the tension between them is fueled by their disagreements over slavery and secession. In her journal, besides recording weather stats and events at the lighthouse, Amelia confesses her growing agony over her parents' animosity and the coming war. As her mother sinks into a depression and her father closes himself off and the community becomes more hostile, Amelia has questions and heartaches of her own. At 15, she is one of the older protagonists in the series, and as you've just heard, she bears heavy burdens. The schism between her parents is representative of what was happening all over Delaware, according to the book. Those in northern counties support the Union and are in favor of abolition, while those in southern counties are disdainful of newly inaugurated President Lincoln and reject abolitionist and pro-Union laws. Delaware doesn't get mentioned as much as other states in Civil War discussions, but it is close to the dividing line, so families and communities would be torn apart. I read this book when I was a kid. Again, I had only a vague recollection of it. Mostly I remember finding it dreary, and I have to agree with my past self. It is a grim, sobering story on multiple levels, but I am sure that I got more out of it now than I did as a kid. Number 24 is The Journal of James Edmund Pease, a Civil War Union Soldier, Virginia, 1863, by Jim Murphy. This is My Name is America, number 2, published in September 1998. 16-year-old James is an orphan who joined the army to get a square meal and a pair of boots. His superior has ordered him to start keeping a diary so that later, when the war is over and the lieutenant is writing his memoirs, he'll have another account to compare with his own. James is at a loss what to write, and the lieutenant keeps upbraiding him for not including enough detail, for being too modest, for writing about food so much that it sounds like a recipe book. And all of this makes for yet another diverting My Name is America journal, at least in the first half. The second part is more sober as the regiment finally goes to battle and James is separated from his men. This book has gone through 3 different editions. There's this one I had with this cover, there's this one that gives James more of a baby face, and there's this one that was published under the title On Enemy Soil. James is a very likable guy, and I say guy because he's one of the oldest My Name is America protagonists, and at this point, after all of his experiences, he's more man than boy. He is haunted by memories of a rebel corpse they found, and he's preoccupied with his own apparent bad luck, rumors of which are perpetuated by a bully in the regiment. That bully becomes even more of a problem when James gets promoted. It's crazy that a 16-year-old is made a sergeant so quickly and given authority over a group that includes men twice his age, but that's war, especially the Civil War. I keep thinking how fun it would have been if they had printed these books like real diaries with coffee and ink stains and frayed edges and things like that, and this one would have been especially cool. It's definitely a missed opportunity there. I will say, though, that this one might not be suitable for younger readers. I don't know, it's got some violence and gore, obviously. There are also 2 appearances of the N-word in dialogue. It's a bit shocking to see that in juvenile fiction printed in the 90s. Obviously, reader discretion is advised. Number 27 is I Thought My Soul Would Rise and Fly, The Diary of Patsy, a Freed Girl, Mars Bluff, South Carolina, 1865, by Joyce Hanson. This is Dear America number 7, published in October 1997. 12 or 13-year-old Patsy has spent most of her life as a slave on the Davis Hall plantation. Though she and the other slaves are free now, life on the plantation seems to be continuing pretty much as it was. There's a promise of wages, a new school, a share of the land, but these changes are slow in coming, and when some former slaves begin leaving the plantation, the workload increases for Patsy, who feels she has nowhere to go. This was a really good one. Patsy's a heroine you immediately like and root for. She's often overlooked by her companions. She has a bad leg, so she limps. She's called a dunce or dim-witted because she stammers. But secretly, she knows how to read and write. She learned while playing with the white children and was given journal, ink, and a pen as a cruel joke. The giver assumed she'd never be able to use these things, but lonely Patsy writes up a storm, addressing the diary as her dear friend. She doesn't know who her parents were, if they're living or dead, and she's always hoping that someone will turn up at the gates to claim her as their own. But as she develops a love of reading, she also discovers a passion for teaching others to read and write. Despite her difficulties, she begins to find her place in this new, messy world full of unknowns. The book manages to touch on a lot of things that were going on in this transitional period, the end of the war to the beginning of Reconstruction. It's just the tip of the iceberg, but all things considered, it does a good job. Number 29 is The Great Railroad Race, The Diary of Libby West, Utah Territory, 1868, by Christiana Gregory. This is Dear America number 14, published in April 1999. 14-year-old Libby's father dreams of running his own newspaper. When he and his war buddy decide to follow Union Pacific out west, chronicling its mission to build a transcontinental railroad, Libby, her little brother, and her mother join them. Again, we have an event that both branches of the series covered. This was actually published first, but Sean Sullivan's journal begins a year earlier, so it comes first chronologically. The two narratives have much in common. They follow the same path, discuss the same problems, cover similar details, like the workers' dining car where the plates are nailed down to the tables. And in Sean's book, he's actually the guy who has to come through and wipe them down really fast. They both cover the Hell on Wheels town, anti-Chinese sentiment, concerns about shoddy work on the railroad. One difference I noticed is that in this account there seems to be less lingering tension from the war, more striving for unity. Libby's little brother drives her crazy, and she can be outspoken at times, which can get her into trouble. But when she recounts her parents' conversations and disagreements, you see where she gets it from. Her mother's exasperation with the father is quite humorous. Libby is striving to be a better person and looking forward to becoming a young lady. In the second half, a romance begins to emerge. This came out of nowhere to me because the love interest is a guy I thought was much older. So at first I was like, huh? But we got that straightened out. I went all the way back to the beginning and reread her description of this character, and I was like, okay, so I really jumped to some conclusions there. It is a sweet courtship. Other highlights include Libby's mom pulling an old piece of shrapnel out of her dad's leg. That was gross. And the men get all excited for the women to try a new clothes drying machine. So they do, and it works, but it also rips off all the buttons, and the women are like, great, we just made more work for ourselves. Let's never use this again. Number 30 is The Journal of Joshua Loper, a Black Cowboy, The Chisholm Trail, 1871, by Walter Dean Myers. This is My Name is America number 3, published in April 1999. 16-year-old Joshua Loper works on a cattle ranch in Texas. He is thrilled when he's invited to join a cattle drive up to Abilene, Kansas. Though his mother is reluctant for him to go, given the danger and his lack of experience, he is eager to realize his dream of being a real cowboy. I liked this one a lot. I've seen cattle drives in movies, so I found it easy enough to follow, and overall, it was a very entertaining read. Josh is super likable. He's kind of naive, but he learns his lessons quickly, and he has such a sweet way with the animals. He has this one horse that he's got a close bond with, and he sings to the cattle at night to keep them calm, and then it helps keep the other men calm as well, so then they'll ask that he sing a song, and I don't know, there's just something really kind of heartwarming about it. The man leading the drive, who was a captain in the Confederacy, seems to dislike him, seems like he doesn't want him on the drive at all, and he takes every opportunity to point out his inexperience. There is a racial component there, but he also recognizes his strengths, and Joshua is constantly trying to figure out what makes him tick. The writing style is conversational, it's informal, and there are some run-on sentences, but it's very humorous, and I found it a pleasure to read. I love that he records the banter and the ribbing between the cowboys. There were several lines that made me laugh out loud. Really, the book brings out a variety of emotions. There was one part that made me tear up, but I also laughed multiple times. Number 36 is My Face to the Wind, The Diary of Sarah Jane Price, a Prairie Teacher, Broken Bow, Nebraska, 1881, by Jim Murphy. This is Dear America number 25, published in October 2001. After her father's sudden death from black diphtheria, 14-year-old Sarah Jane finds herself completely alone in Nebraska. The woman who owns the boarding house they've been living in has been charitable, but now she's talking about sending her away to an orphan asylum. Desperate to stay near her father's grave, Sarah Jane racks her brain for a source of income and independence. It takes half the book for her to get the idea, inspired by a vision of her father, to become a teacher like him. which I already knew would happen because it was in the title. So waiting for her to get there was a little tedious, but I really liked the book from the second half on, when Sarah Jane convinces the board to give her a chance, and she sets up the ramshackle soddy they give her as a classroom. Now, Sarah Jane is only 14, and though she manages to fool the board into thinking she's 16, I felt she did betray some immaturity in the first part. However, as she takes charge of her own future and assumes greater responsibilities, she grows up a lot and becomes a more likable individual. There are several additional themes here, and the story of a very young teacher starting out at a rough country school is reminiscent of later Little House books and Anne of Green Gables sequels, and that familiarity made this even more appealing for me. Fun side note, there's zero romance in this, but there is an older boy who is mentioned, and I thought, I bet he likes her. And sure enough, in the epilogue, it's written that years later, they get married. I knew it! Number 38 is A Coal Miner's Bride, The Diary of Annetka Kaminska, Latimer, Pennsylvania, 1896, by Susan Campbell Bartoletti. This is Dear America number 18, published in July 2000. Annetka is a 13-year-old girl living with her little brother in Poland, learning to be a good wife and mother from her grandmother as she awaits word from her father, who's been working in America. When she does hear from him, he is sending tickets for them to join him in a Pennsylvania coal mining town. The catch is that Annetka has been promised in marriage to the man who bought the tickets. Annetka, who had hoped to marry for love, is dismayed, but she doesn't have much choice, especially after she and a charming young soldier who has been showing interest in her run into trouble, forcing them to flee the country in a hurry. Poland at this time is occupied by Tsarist Russia. Soldiers patrol the streets, reinforcing harsh anti-Polish laws. The United States offers a haven, except the situation in Latimer isn't much better. The population of Irish, Italian, Welsh, and Polish immigrants is poor and struggling. They are forced to take the most dangerous and deadly jobs in the mines, and they are paid less to do more work, while facing open hostility from American citizens. It is not what Annetka expected. Meanwhile, she's contending with separation from the charming soldier and making the acquaintance of her husband-to-be and his 3 little girls. This is the one I have been most curious about ever since I saw the title a few months ago. I could not imagine how they would tackle the subject, and I'm still pretty surprised by it. I did not expect the heroine to be only 13, yikes! She's still a child herself, and here she is getting married and expected to become a mother of 3. It's just, oof. Thankfully, Annetka is wise and independent and has retained everything she was taught back in her homeland. She's an expert beekeeper, and she makes bombs, creams, soaps, which she can sell. She works like a dog, and she maintains all their religious traditions on her own. There are lots of interesting cultural details here, but predominantly the theme is the importance of doing your duty, but also knowing when to put your foot down. I liked the book, but it was another unhappy story. Pretty much everything you hoped would not happen did. And I'd say it's another one intended for slightly older readers. It doesn't have anything explicit, but there is some implied adult content. Number 39 is The Journal of Finn Riordan, a Newsie, New York City, 1899, by Susan Campbell Bartoletti. This is My Name is America number 17, published in May 2003. Finn is a 13-year-old boy suffering through school in the day and selling Mr. Hearst's newspapers in the evenings, giving his earnings to his mom for the family savings. They would like to move out of their dumpy, smelly, crowded tenement apartment in the Bowery district, but there's always some unexpected expense that crops up. Although Finn enjoys running around with his gang of friends, he also loves writing. Despite his disdain for school and his teacher, who uses the paddle a lot, he is a good student and he writes in his journal as much as he can, dreaming of someday writing for the newspapers instead of just selling them. I figured that this book would cover the famous newsboy strike, and it does, and it's a lot like the movie, minus the singing and the dancing, but that wasn't until the last 20 pages or so. The rest of it contains other adventures, Finn and his friends doing stuff, doing things they shouldn't be doing, and things happening with Finn's family, which I particularly enjoyed. They are a fun bunch. Their interactions are amusing. His mom's pretty awesome. She punches a guy in the face at one point. And Finn's writing overall is entertaining. Number 40 is Dreams in the Golden Country, The Diary of Zipporah Feldman, a Jewish Immigrant Girl, New York City, 1903, by Catherine Lasky. This is Dear America number 9, published in January 1998. 12-year-old Zipporah, called Zippy, arrives with her parents and 2 older sisters on Ellis Island, having fled the pogroms in Russia. After they have been processed, they find a place to live in the city, where each member of the family struggles to find employment and to reconcile the way things are done in America with the long-standing traditions of the Jewish village they left behind. Zippy has to start school in 1st grade because she doesn't know any English, and she is mortified to be with all these little kids. She writes her diary in Yiddish, translated, obviously, so that we can read it, but partway through she begins switching to English as she gets more comfortable with it. These sections are in italics. She still includes some Yiddish words, though, and that's fun, because I love Yiddish. Her parents are both having a hard time adjusting, which leads to a lot of conflict. One sister gets involved with a Gentile boy. That becomes a huge thing. The other sister is obsessed with starting a union. That's 3 books in a row about unions, by the way, which is about as tedious as 3 books in a row about the Oregon Trail. In a way, Zippy reminded me of Anne Frank, not just because she's an adolescent Jewish girl, but because of her personality. She's lively, she's curious, she's interested in a lot of things. She's inspired by Marie Curie and the Wright brothers. She writes to all of them, never hears back. She collects their pictures from the newspapers and puts them over the bed, and then she realizes her true passion is the theater and she wants to become an actress. And according to the epilogue, she does. She becomes successful in both theater and film, even earns an Academy Award nomination. She loses to Ginger Rogers for Kitty Foyle. And then it ends with her granddaughter co-starring in Jesus Christ Superstar and her being like, oh, I couldn't be more thrilled. Oh. It was one of those epilogues where I was like, okay, these are things that we can verify are not true very easily. I liked the book, though. It had depth and tragic things did happen, but it managed to include these elements without being a miserable slog. Number 43 is Hear My Sorrow, The Diary of Angela Donato, a shirtwaist worker, New York City, 1909, by Deborah Hopkinson. This is Dear America number 36, published in October 2004. 14-year-old Angela is living in a tenement with her family and other Italian immigrants from Sicily. Theirs is a very close-knit community. They don't really like to talk to other people or interact with other people. They keep to themselves. Money is tight, and when her father gets a back injury, she reluctantly quits school and joins her older sister working at a shirtwaist factory. Shirtwaist factory girls have been mentioned in a couple previous books. When you say shirtwaist factory, my first thought is of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, a tragedy that I read about years ago in one of those Sunfire young adult historical romance novels. I think it might have been Rachel. We do eventually get to that, but first, it's another Union-centric book, another one that gets quite political, another one about an immigrant family living in New York City. And now that I've read most of this series, I've got to say the overall perspective of American history that's presented does seem myopic at times, which is ironic given they were clearly aiming for diversity. At least this author did a good job maintaining the story through these events instead of making every diary entry read like a news update. And the book itself is fine. Interestingly, Angela makes friends with a Jewish coworker named Sarah who leads the girls in a strike. Angela is torn because her family needs and expects her to work. Her sister is furious with her. The Italians aren't cooperating because they feel the unions are being organized by the Jews for the Jews, but she also wants to participate. Anyway, Sarah reminded me a lot of Zipporah Feldman from a few books ago. Where this book truly distinguishes itself is the latter section when the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire occurs. That was a terrible, horrifying tragedy, and the diary does an excellent job covering it. That whole section where Angela witnesses it, and then the aftermath, are very sad. Number 44 is Voyage on the Great Titanic, The Diary of Margaret Ann Brady, RMS Titanic, 1912, by Ellen Emerson White. This is Dear America number 11, published in September 1998, so after the movie came out. Margaret is a 13-year-old who's been raised by nuns in an English orphanage. Her older brother William has gone ahead to America, and she expects to join him there someday. When a high society American lady in need of a traveling companion offers to bring Margaret, the nuns are pleased that she's getting this opportunity. They'll be traveling on the Titanic. Obviously, this is one where, just by the title, I know what's going to happen, to a certain extent. At first, I was put off because the style and length of the diary entries, which had a lot of backstory, made me fear this would be like the newer releases. But actually, Margaret is just a thorough writer, and this is good. She describes the grandiose ship, the opulent furnishings, the fancy multi-course meals, the awe-inspiring ocean, all in such detail and with such personality that the storytelling becomes immersive. She's another heroine whose maturity makes you forget that she's only 13. She's a bit saucy, with a sense of humor that the American lady finds alarming, but privately, she feels out of place. She's traveling in first class and enjoying the privileges, but she doesn't fit in with the society and is aware she belongs more in steerage. Afterward, this contributes to a tremendous sense of survivor's guilt. A few famous people are mentioned, and Margaret has brief exchanges with Mr. Andrews, John Jacob Astor, and Molly Brown. The author doesn't go too crazy with cameos, though, and while most of the well-known, I'll say, elements are included, it never feels like we're just ticking the boxes. The account has a natural flow, and it feels genuine and personal, and it is moving. My one tiny quibble is that only a few pages of this Dear America book take place in America. It starts in England, and then most of it is at sea. It's very unusual for a book in this series, and it makes me feel like it was not written for this series originally, like someone just wrote an account of a young girl on the Titanic, and then they were like, oh hey, let's force it into this lucrative series. I don't know, that's very cynical. I don't know that that's what happened at all. On the other hand, it's a very interesting perspective, and, well, at this point, I'm glad to read something different, something that takes a totally different approach. And it did work just fine. I'm just pointing it out. Number 46 is When Christmas Comes Again, the World War I Diary of Simone Spencer, New York City to the Western Front, 1917, by Beth Seidel Levine. This is Dear America number 30, published in November 2002. When the U.S. enters the war, 17-year-old Simone wants to do her part. She joins the YWCA and helps some wounded soldiers recuperate, but it's when a call is sent out for American women fluent in French that she finds her purpose. Simone's father is of affluent New York stock, but her mother is French and raised her and her brother to be bilingual. This allows Simone to join the army and travel to the front as a switchboard operator. At 17, Simone is considerably older than the other Dear America heroines, and you become more aware of this as you go through the books one after the other like this, which, if I haven't said it already, I'm going to say it right now. I do not recommend this. But you're going through them and it's like 13, 14, 15, 12, 14. Most of them seem to be 13, 14, which makes sense. These are kind of coming-of-age books, and that is coming-of-age time. But then you get one where she's 17, and it's like, ugh. There's a big gulf between a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old. She's also considerably richer than other heroines. They absolutely favor the stories of poor immigrants or children of poor immigrants, and it was only a matter of time between her posh upbringing and lack of gritty life experience would cause friction between her and the other young people she meets. It certainly makes the book unique. The first part is kind of dull, where it's just her living her life, but it picks up a lot once Simone joins the army. She matures over the course of the book. She makes a close friend, starts her own love story in France like her parents. She experiences heartache, and the work she and the other women are doing is arduous, risking their own lives to relay important military messages to men on the battlefield. And it is chaotic. There's the noise of gunfire and bombs, and people are shouting, and there's all this code, and they're dirty and dusty, and it's mad. Interestingly, she doesn't say very much about the suffrage movement. She does mention it here and there, but she doesn't seem to care that much. She does question the Women's Peace Organization and their protests, however, and I felt that this book did just as good a job showing the strength and fortitude and kind of fierce independence of the American woman in 1918 without being quite so obvious. By the way, the title and the little wreath around the portrait makes this seem like a Christmas special, but that's just marketing. And those are the books that I consider the best of the two series. I hope you enjoyed this video. Even though it didn't turn out the way I planned, I hope it was interesting and informative, and I really appreciate those of you who stayed through the whole thing. I would love to hear from you if you read or remember these books, so feel free to share any thoughts you have in the comments below, and I will be back next Saturday. Thanks for watching.